my name is Jason Grillo. I'm the event director for AirMiners. Before we get started, I'm going to ask you all to please rise if you are able to and remove your hats.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, a true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
All right. So welcome everybody. Good day, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, bienvenue, mesdames et messieurs. Again, my name is Jason Grillo. I'm the event director for AirMiners. It's lovely to see you all here today. We have a special event focused on carbon removal in the beautiful country of Canada. Canada occupies a really outsized presence in the landscape of carbon removal, and we wanted to focus on an event highlighting some of the advances that have taken place, some of the leading carbon removal companies in the country of Canada, and also talk about some of the opportunities that lie for companies to continue their development in Canada. So with that in mind, we're going to have our panel discussion with four esteemed panelists and our excellent moderator, Omar Sadoun, who's going to be who I'll introduce to you shortly. A little bit of housekeeping. We're going to do our usual panel discussion for about 35 minutes, followed by 15 or 20 minutes or so of Q&A. I'll come on with some announcements at the very end, and then have a Zoom networking session at the top of the hour again, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific time, for those who want to stay. Don't feel obligated to stay, but if you'd like to, feel free. So I wanted to say this is the last note is that this is the start. Certainly there are many, many other activities that we can only touch on briefly here involving carbon removal in Canada, and that this is the first of what I hope to be a series of future events and activities through AirMiners that feature Canada and Canadian air miners. So thank you again for coming, and we'll leave the remainder of the discussion to Omar. Omar.
Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to see all the people that were able to join us for this live event. For those that haven't met me yet, my name is Omar Sadoun, and I'm a student in the Masters in Climate Change program at the University of Waterloo. I enrolled in this program a few years ago as part of a transition out of my old career, and I'll tell you a little bit about why and how I got interested in carbon removal as a career choice. When I first started looking at working in climate solutions, one of the first people that a friend told me to talk to was actually one of today's panelists, and that's Alexander Tavisoli. Part of that discussion was about finding a fit and passion within the larger climate solutions industry. My degree has taught me a lot about the categories of mitigation, adaptive capacity, and vulnerabilities. And these are all important going forward. But as I learned more through school and AirMiners, I realized that atmospheric carbon removal can fall between the mitigation strategies, and it includes the equity and adaptation piece. A ton of carbon removed is a global benefit. It helps Canada as much as it helps the small and developing countries that contributed typically the least to putting it there. So that's enough about me and my reasons. We got a great group of panelists here that I think we're ready to start hearing from. They've asked to do their own introductions, but I'm going to add on one extra question to the intros to make it a little more personal, which is also to tell us not just about yourselves, but one of the last great TV shows you binged during the lockdown. So why don't we start with Alexandra, and then Alex, you can pick who goes from there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Omar. So hi, everyone. I'm Alex Tavisoli. My background and general interest is in sustainable resource use and management as it relates to the energy transition. And most recently, that took me to studying ways that carbon dioxide can be used as a feedstock to our existing petrochemical processes. So my interests are generally in commodity chemicals production using carbon dioxide. And that led me to start Solistra, which is a company that is commercializing a technology that uses solar energy to convert carbon dioxide into a number of downstream petrochemicals that are usually made from fossil fuels. I just recently finished my PhD, and so I watched The Chair last week, which was a little too close to home, frankly, but it's a really great show with Sandra Oh as the lead, a fellow Canadian. So that's my answer. Oh, I have to choose the next person, right? I guess I will pass the baton to Stacey.
Thanks, Alexandra. Hi, everyone. My name is Stacey Koch, and I'm the director of Shopify's Sustainability Fund. For those that aren't familiar with Shopify, we're a hosted commerce platform with over 1.7 million merchants building and scaling their business using our software and tools. And so our sustainability fund is a $5 million annual commitment to spend money on supporting the most promising solutions and technologies out there with the objective of reversing climate change. And so we have 13 companies in our portfolio at the moment, 2 of which are on this call, and we'll be looking to add more in the years to come. So really happy to be here. TV. That's a tough one for me. I don't get into too many TV shows. One thing I did watch during lockdown is I went back, and for those from Canada, you'll recall, I rewatched a bunch of The Nature of Things with all of my extra time. So David Suzuki fan over here. Why don't you go ahead, Mike?
Sure, thanks, Stacey. So Mike Kellen, I'm the CEO of Planetary Hydrogen. Just a quick shout out to, I see Dr. Greg Rao, my co-founder on the call as well. So hi, Greg, as well. And our technology, pioneered by Greg out of Lawrence Livermore National Labs originally, and then brought up to Canada for development, takes carbon dioxide out of the air and stores it in ocean chemistry using a process called ocean alkalinity enhancement. And as a byproduct, we produce hydrogen. So in terms of TV, the last one I did was Ted Lasso, actually, on Apple TV, which is a great show. First season better than the second, but still a great show. And I think that's over to you now, Rob.
Great, thanks a lot, Mike. That was my choice as well. I really enjoyed that. And Stacey, I'm very proud to say that my mother-in-law was a guest host of one of the Nature of Things recently on the Quai de l'Olf. So check it out.
Amazing.
So my name is Rob Niven. I'm CEO and founder of Carbon Cure. I live close to this beautiful place behind me in Victoria, British Columbia. The company is based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia. Our company uses carbon dioxide to produce concrete, and we're now deployed and just celebrated our 400th plant over 4 continents now, and commercializing a bunch of new technologies and hardware and digital, and doing some other exciting things. That's probably enough about me. Back to you, Omar.
Thanks very much, everybody. And I'm loving the backgrounds, Rob and Mike. Looks very serene where both of you are. Yeah. For the first question is going to be for Rob. Can you give us a picture of what the greater Canadian carbon removal ecosystem looks like right now? I know that's a big question, but hopefully you can help us out here.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And so I think first off, CDR, or carbon removal, is not as defined of a term as it may be in the US. Is like we tend to have a blend of carbon capture, utilization, and storage companies and carbon removal technology companies, which I think there isn't that much of a difference between the two, and probably the main distinction is just the source of CO2. But beyond that, I'd really say that Canada punches above its weight as far as companies go. We have some fantastic companies that many of them rank in the North American top clean tech companies. In fact, Carbon Engineering in the year prior ourselves were listed as the top North American, and there's probably about a dozen other Canadian clean tech companies, many of them in this area, that rank within the top 100 companies. So it's probably about a dozen companies. I'm not going to try to name any of them because I don't want to hurt anyone's feeling. It's a very Canadian thing to say. And then there's probably about another 20 pre-commercial companies that are just on the verge, that are really exciting across the whole gamut of different spectrum within the space. Companies are only a product of the ecosystem, though. And there are many, many different actors that play critical roles in having so many excellent companies. So just to sort of list some of those categories, starts off with academics. There's some phenomenal schools and also researchers in this area. Canada has a world-class R&D funding system where there's a lot of early TRL funding that's available to get these companies out into the real world. However, we struggle typically with scale up, but that's starting to change. Some deployment policy, not much. I would probably say that Alberta as a province is actually one of the leaders in this area. The federal and other provincial governments are doing things here, a bunch of tech incubators. I'd say something that Canada is also a real standout is around carbon markets, whether it's buyers or other architects that are shaping the new carbon markets related to CDR. Certainly Shopify is a massive player in this area, but so are real leaders like Mark Carney that are playing a very active role internationally in this area. Another area that I think is starting to emerge is there's becoming more large incumbent industries that are playing a more active role in adopting these technologies, because typically these systems don't stand alone, but they need to be integrated with heavy industry. So that's something where I'm seeing there's a real openness to at least pilot and then hopefully soon start commercially deploying these. Lastly, I'll say that probably where we are a little running behind other jurisdictions is I don't think we have a very vibrant INGO community specific to CCUS and CDR, or like those kinds of like thought leaders or think tanks that we see. Of course, everyone would turn their mind towards Carbon 180. We don't have those kinds of groups in Canada, which I think would be a great addition. And I also think our policy tends to follow other jurisdictions, most notably the US, around this topic. So we don't tend to lead as much on policy, but we tend to be fast followers.
Thank you. No, that's really good. And we're going to touch on a few of those topics. I think one of the first things you mentioned was about helping define that term CDR. And when I first began specializing, more of my studies from the broader climate work to carbon capture, one of the most confusing parts was getting a good understanding of those differences between terms like CDR, CCUS, and NET. And I'm sure there's audience members out there that felt the same way as I did. Stacey, would you mind giving us your thoughts on how you'd break up these terms before we dive further in?
Sure, happy to give a quick overview of how we are thinking about it, because Rob kind of touched on it. There can be different definitions and different grab bags underneath those terms. But really, when I think about carbon dioxide removal, in my mind, it's reverse emissions. It's sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and putting it somewhere. And from our perspective, that can be a tree, that can be soil, that can be a technology, that can be the ocean. There's all sorts of options there. When we talk about carbon capture and utilization and storage, carbon capture to me is that end of pipe solution where you're nabbing those emissions before they take off. And so it's really, it is a minor distinction if you think about it, because you're doing it at end of pipe at a high concentration, or you're doing it after the fact from the atmosphere. And so, both of those play critical roles in what we're all trying to achieve. And then when we have negative emissions technologies, again, I would say that those are similar to CDR, where a negative emission is different, is the opposite of a positive emission. So you're just flipping the cycle around and pulling it out of the atmosphere. So it really does come down to the sources. Either it's end of pipe or it's the atmosphere. And then when we get into storage, I mean, that runs the gamut in terms of solutions that are available there. But I delineate the terms using the source of the CO2.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Stacey, can you continue to tell us a little more about how Shopify's sustainability fund evaluates tech readiness? What Canadian companies stand out to you as being further along in their development, or maybe the tech more than the company itself?
Sure. So when we think about evaluating a company to include them in our sustainability fund, one of the elements that we think through is the TRL, or where they are at in the development. And really, it's almost irrelevant because we're comfortable with something that's on paper, that's ready to maybe move to proof of concept, that still has to have the science and the technology de-risked. And then we're also comfortable with things that are commercialized and then need to scale, because what we're actually focused on is trying to make sure that the solutions we need to reach gigaton scale have the support that they need when they need it. So we really hone in on removing barriers. And so for an earlier stage company that's looking to make the gap, and if they're successful in their pilots and actually lock away some carbon, we'll buy it. And so that gives that early revenue stream to companies that are just starting out. But then for commercialized companies, what we recognize for them being important is revenue certainty. So that's where we get into multi-year deals with options to increase our purchase quantities and go from there. So we look at it in a very broad approach, but what we want to make sure is that when we're pulling in companies, that we have a diverse tech stack. So we want a variety of solutions. And then even if we're looking at something like direct air capture, we want to make sure we have representation from all of the different approaches, because at this point, no one's going to be able to pick a winner. So we want to make sure that we're supporting the solutions to get to the point where we can identify what really needs a lot of support behind it. And then we'll be able to reallocate. So that's how we think about technology readiness level when we're looking at making a purchase.
Thank you. No, that's awesome. And I think I want to stick a little bit with more of the carbon market conversation as well. So Alexandra, how would you describe Canada's carbon market? Do we lean more towards a compliance market or a voluntary market?
Well, my understanding of it is that we have a hybrid of regulatory and voluntary market offsets available, with the hybrid version having a benefit because the regulated market is really for regulated emitters. So the biggest emitters who have in place carbon caps are able to purchase offset certificates so that they can potentially go past that. But we also have a voluntary market, which makes it available for non-regulated emitters like Shopify, for example, to still participate in the carbon market. And that's a real way of I guess, allowing a larger number of players to really influence what carbon tech can reach the market. Because as Stacey mentioned, that's often a really early revenue stream for people getting new stage technologies off the ground. So I think that hybrid market is probably a good way to popularize carbon credits as widely as possible in a short frame of time that we have.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most confusing things sometimes, is because we have this carbon pricing scheme nationally. Each province differs, and so going from province to province, you might find there's big differences in how the carbon is priced or purchased. So Stacey, going back to you, can you tell us how Shopify views the market purchases and the pricing?
Pricing is a fun one for us because we're not looking to buy a set quantity. We do have a set budget, but operationally, Shopify is a software company, which opens us up to being able to reduce our carbon footprint significantly by procuring renewables, limiting travel, making better choices, and controlling our office environments. So because of all of that, we have a small footprint and then a $5 million budget, which means we're not trying to drive to the lowest price point to match up the tonnage we buy with our footprint so that we can remain carbon neutral. What we're trying to do with the pricing is make sure that we are giving our fund companies the revenue that they need. So when we're considering pricing, we want to understand the actual cost of operations, like how much cash does it take to run that and secure a ton of carbon? How much does it take for the monitoring and the due diligence and verification that's required to confirm that in fact that ton has been caught and stored and locked away? And then we also obviously want these companies to be able to bring in more money so that they can conduct research, buy equipment, whatever else they're working on. So for us, we really want to understand the business and what kind of price point is going to be most helpful for this company and why. But that's more for earlier developing technologies and companies. When we're looking at something that's commercial, I think the biggest influence obviously is that capital cost and the operating costs, but it's also the durability of that carbon credit or carbon unit is going to be something that we're willing to pay a premium for a highly durable credit that will lock away for thousands of years. Because if you take a very principled approach, if you buy a credit that's only got a 10-year durability term or storage term associated with it, then theoretically your emissions are back out in the air. So you probably should rebuy that credit. So because of that approach, we really want to make sure that we understand the permanence and the relationship that has with the capital cost so that we can understand the value that each different kind of solution will have at scale.
Awesome. And is there a home team advantage? Do you pay a premium for carbon reduced in Canada?
I mean, it goes back to what Rob said. It's the richness of the ecosystem in Canada, because it's true. We have quite a few Canadian companies that we support, and it is a bit of a home team advantage because of the network that we have access to. So there's a lot on our home turf to get behind. But Shopify, I mean, we were founded in Ottawa, and now we are a remote first company, which means we're, reducing our office footprint. Employees are working from home. And when we actually post our earnings and our financial disclosures, our location is now internet everywhere. And it's kind of fitting because the atmosphere is everywhere too. So to go back to what Omar talked about at the beginning, a ton of negative emissions is a benefit for the entire planet. So we kind of see a complementary piece there between the atmosphere and the internet.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump into a little bit about why Canada, or what the experience has been. So Mike, can you tell us whether the decision for planetary hydrogen was always to start here in Canada?
Well, I think that Greg's been working on this technology for a really long time, prior to me being involved and working out of California on the technology. So I can't say it's always been Canada for sure. But when I got involved, for us, the why Canada question really came down to, the ecosystem, but it came down to funding. I think that when we started the company about 2 years ago, there was a lot of difference between how the US saw funding, CCS type of technologies, and how Canada did, where, in the US it was very sort of like we pick winners, right? So, most of the funding from DOE or anything like that to get to the next stage of development of this technology was, sort of targeted towards things that produced compressed CO2. Right. So if the end of your process wasn't, I have CO2 in my hands and it's compressed and I can do something with it, or that wasn't part of your process, you're basically disqualified from a lot of the funding, because that's where a lot of the research was and all that kind of stuff. Whereas Canada has a very different approach. It's very much more sort of like, if you check these boxes, you get the money. So it's sort of, we've got things like IRAP and SHRED and, SDTC and things like that. And it's not directed at a solution. Nobody says like only these solutions qualify. It's more sort of, are you doing R&D? And if you are, and you tick all those boxes and it's good science and it's good work, it doesn't really matter what the field is. At the end of the day, you can get the funding. So that was the carrot that I used to drag Greg into Canada and pull him up here. For me, it's very much like, I've lived in the UK, I've lived in California, I've been all over the place. I keep coming back to Ottawa just because I love it here. You can see this is Algonquin Park behind me, which is where I kind of grew up. But it's special for me. So it was pretty easy for me to make the choice to be in Canada. But I think for the company, it was the right choice as well for that reason.
Awesome. And I think one thing every founder and entrepreneur has to contend with is finding other great folks to work alongside. So again, for Mike, what's been your experience hiring and recruiting?
Yeah, it's been great. I think Canada, in Canada, all the typical things about hiring for startups, right? Like you need to hire people that are a cultural fit with a startup. You can bring in somebody who's got the most experience and talent in the world, but if they don't fit within, sort of the startup environment, they're probably not going to be super successful. All those usual things are your hiring filter for a startup. But I think Canada in particular, for the talent base, there's a few things that come out. One is that we have some amazing educational institutions, universities, and things like that across Canada that are doing some of this work. And I think that, the openness to different solutions across Canada drives some of that. But then as well in Canada, we have a really, really strong base of oil and gas expertise. And that gives you a lot of talent that is available that's around, things that we work with every day. So process engineering and dealing with chemical systems and dealing with, air liquid, gas transfers and things like that. Like all of those kinds of talents are not in short supply in Canada and across the country. We talk about Alberta a lot, but there's a huge talent base out in the Maritimes as well for the offshore industry and everything like that. There's a lot of talent here. So I think it's been a benefit. I've switched, right? Because I used to be a software guy and now I'm in the hard tech space. When we built companies in Canada from a software perspective, we would see in certain areas almost a 60% cost savings on your salary base, which played into a combination of just 30% lower base salary rate because of different social supports and things like that, as well as just general competitiveness for salaries. And then compounded by the exchange rate. So, sort of you get some benefits from that as well. In this industry, I don't have the comparative to tell you whether that's really substantial or not. But the talent exists and it's there and it's strong and it's been really great.
Awesome. Rob, since being one of the winners of the Carbon X Prize, has this helped attract more attention to the Canadian removal space? And a second parter to this, do you think X Prize has been helpful for building the industry?
Maybe and yes. So I would say that certainly it's helped spread the word. I guess with who would be the question. Like I would say like the investor community was already very well aware of who are the players in the space and were pretty locked into the opportunity. So I don't know if any say new investors became aware. I would say it was a great calling card though to engage with government. They're always looking for external validation. So that was definitely helpful. Maybe some corporates as well. So I would say that that's been very material for us. And of course, like internally as well, it's a great validation for the team. And that may be the most important thing is just really energizing the group and maybe attracting and retaining staff. So talent, as Mike had mentioned, is such an important item, which goes hand in hand with culture. So does that answer your question, Omar?
Yeah, I think so. I think what I was trying to get at as well is, I think does X Prize, can it distract entrepreneurs from chasing other solutions they might be passionate about as well? Because I know that with Carbon Cure, you guys certainly didn't set out from the beginning to be an X Prize winning company. I think it was chasing the solution that you saw most fit.
Yeah, but I think good entrepreneurs know how to remain focused and not to follow shiny things.
Yeah,
which is really challenging, especially in Canada. Like we talk a lot about our R&D funding ecosystem. There is a trap you can get into where you're starting to shape your objectives based upon what wins a grant rather than what is good for the company. So that those are always risks. I think in our case though, is our pathway was very much aligned with the X Prize, and there was quite a bit of additional capital that needed to be spent. So that was a risk that we had to make, and there were some additional like hires and labor, and like, so it wasn't, of course there was some element that was beyond what we're normally doing, but it was pretty close. And I would say one great outcome from it is, like, most people don't know, but we won the Carbon X Prize on an entirely different technology. So that really forced us to not just focus on growth, but to really accelerate the deployment, commercialization of new technology, in this case for our reclaimed water system. So that was a good boost for us to accelerate that deployment and force us to really innovate, and because of that sort of competitive dynamic. And so that it would perform better. And now that technology is fully commercial, supplying concrete, and we're looking for that next wave of adopters. So overall, it's been a great experience for us. And I do remember being a young man, hearing about Richard Branson winning the first one, and I do recall that. So there's a little bit of pride there as well, just thinking that we're following in the footsteps of some great companies.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Alex now and change topics a little bit. I'd like to ask you more about how you view issues like diversity, equity, and justice. There's a broader conversation going on in the US with the development of the American Jobs Plan and Families Plan about including underrepresented communities in the new clean economy. But how do you see your responsibilities as a business owner?
Well, I'll answer your question in two parts, one as a business owner and one as a business owner in Canada specifically. As a business owner, it's sort of a no-brainer. There's data to show that diverse teams perform better and achieve their tasks more efficiently, and usually do a better job at it. So that is available data in the social science literature. The second answer is that the Canadian government is particularly set up the same way that you've described the American market. I myself had zero interest in entrepreneurship until I came across a government program that was meant to fund female entrepreneurs in the clean tech space, because the clean tech space is very male heavy. Only about 5% of the CEOs in Canada are solo CEO females. And so they do have a lot of initiatives in place, like the ones that you've described in the US, and it goes past specific groups. So the Canadian government is also encouraging youth under the age of 29. They have a mandate to get them into entrepreneurship as well. And through their Impact Canada challenges are also focusing on things like Indigenous clean energy specifically. So I think the Canadian government is very well set up to continue building their really strong clean tech ecosystem with a diverse priority.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Mike a similar question, but how do you view including Indigenous knowledge and experience into building a long-term enterprise? Is this something that Planetary Hydrogen has had to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you asked the question. I just before this meeting finished 3 days of Indigenous cultural training, and so it's very fresh in my mind. But I think it's so critical. It's something that Canada, it's probably the most embarrassing part of our history, I would say, in Canada is sort of colonialism and cultural genocide that we've embarked on with Indigenous nations across Canada over the last couple hundred years. And those effects are pretty deep wounds in the sort of the sort of, I would say, the unity of our country. It's really critical. I think for us in particular, Indigenous engagement is necessary. And the reason that it's necessary is not just from a perspective of reconciliation with the Indigenous population in Canada, and not just from the perspective of sort of doing good, if you will, but it's necessary from the perspective that we're here attempting to essentially heal damage that we've caused to the earth fundamentally. I mean, like really, if you're, I think, honest about it, we've done a lot of damage to ourselves, and the earth will heal and we'll be gone. But fundamentally, if we want to go and fix this damage, we have to engage with the people who've been closest to the land and the people who have sort of the land embodied in their spirit, and that's really necessary for what we're doing. I would say in a really much more practical way, maybe I'll steal a little bit from your strategy, Alex, to talk about there's data and then there's the right thing to do. On the data side, I mean, just looking at some of the things that are happening in society in Canada, where we are truly, I think, for the first time maybe in our country's history, slowly starting to try to actually fix these issues. You see that Bill C-15, which was the implementation of the UN declarations on the rights of Indigenous people, actually passed through the Senate in June of this year, and that is going to drive out, I think, if we properly implement that, we actually do what we say we're going to do, probably for the first time ever with our Indigenous people. But if we do, we are going to end up in a situation where there is more and more, and rightfully so, more and more control over what we do with our natural resources, with the way that we work with Indigenous people, and it'll push us more into the kinds of partnerships that we should be having anyway with Indigenous nations. And so that's really, really critical. It's something that honestly I'm new to. It's something I'm learning as we go. Trying to be very open to. I can probably talk to you for hours about all my new revelations from the last week, but fundamentally I think it's critical, and it's really important for what we're doing in particular when we're going out there and saying we're going to do something that is fundamentally a minor and local intervention, but an intervention in the natural world in an attempt to help to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Thanks, Mike. I'll stick with you for a minute, but change tracks to. I've talked to the members of your team recently about consultations that are happening with the Canadian government on expanding the capture credits to include more methods, such as yours, the ocean air capture. Can you give us a better picture of how this policy can be grown? And could you tell us how these policies might differ from something like the American 45Q tax credit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's an exciting time. There's no question that in this space, it's just getting more and more exciting. I'm always worried that we're on a hype cycle and it's going to come crashing down at some point. But fundamentally, it's really exciting right now. And so we've got things like our clean fuels standard, the Canada Clean Fuel Standard. We've got the CCUS fund. We've got the announced price on carbon, $170 a ton by 2030. We have a lot of this sort of momentum picking up. And I think right now the state we're in is we're trying to shape as much as we can that to be as effective as possible. So really trying to make it so that it's inclusive to all various different kinds of solutions that have an impact, that it's going to drive that kind of outcome. I think the worst thing that could happen in Canada, and it happens to us all the time, is that our benefits on the early stage R&D and like everything that we do around that and some of the cultural aspects of the Canadian culture in general are really valuable to get some things off the ground and get things moving and all that kind of stuff. But we really do suffer from that sort of brain drain, if you will. Like implementation happens elsewhere, typically, right, in Canada. And that's with the exception of some major sort of, oil infrastructure and natural resource stuff. But fundamentally, a lot of implementation of technology that's developed in Canada doesn't happen in Canada, it actually gets implemented elsewhere. So there's some good strides happening. The investment tax credit on CCUS, which is a little different than the production tax credit for 45Q in the States, that's coming, and is moving forward at the moment, is a good step. But I think we need to keep strengthening those, and we need to have a really international view in Canada of, how are we competitive with these things compared to other credits around the world, especially in the US, if we want to sort of reap the benefits of all of these technologies and actually implement them properly here. Sorry, Rob's got his hand up. So.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
I definitely wasn't meaning to cut you off, Mike.
No, please.
It was interesting, but I feel like I'm seeing a lot of this in the States, and we're very involved in these types of policies. But to build on and to help achieve some of the goals that Mike is mentioning is different policy tools are being looked at now around solving this procurement, or this policy and deployment issue in Canada. And specifically that being procurement is a key example that I'm seeing being incorporated a lot more. When there are products that are being produced with these types of technologies, this can be a very effective means of using government procurement as a way of accelerating the scale up in a similar way that credits do that, where they are very aligned with scale. And that can be a powerful tool, and we're definitely seeing that in the States, and happy to see that those same kind of policy considerations being developed in Canada as well. And the 45Q slight twist in Canada is that it's an equity tax credit. So rather than being paid on the reductions of CO2 on a per unit basis, it's more about helping to offset the actual capex that are going into some of these projects. So that does tend to trend towards more high capex projects than more of a distributed model. So there's definitely some different aspects to this, but there's a lot going on at the very least, and there tends to be a lot of openness for consultation.
Thank you. So I didn't realize we're almost 40 minutes into this, and I know that we want to leave some room for some audience questions here. One big thing we didn't get to touch on amongst the many other questions I had for this group is the election. So we're in the middle of a snap election right now. I'd like to kind of quickly ask each of you what's something you're looking for from each of the different parties. Yeah, maybe a fast answer. Is there a piece of policy? Because I know not all the policy documents have come out yet, or the platforms. Maybe start with Rob.
Well, I'm happy to see that they're all including CCUS, so it'd be a lot to ask for them to be using language of carbon removal in their platforms. But I suppose back to the procurement policy, would really like to see that being incorporated as a means of meeting our climate targets and spurring local innovation.
Yeah, so maybe Stacey next.
In terms of federal election and participation in the voluntary market, I'm not sure that that's going to show up so much there. So the thing that I'm paying quite a lot of attention to is the UN Special Task Force being led by Mark Carney on scaling the voluntary carbon market. That's really the piece of policy that I'm looking forward to seeing get finalized. So that's a big thing for me. But in terms of my personal view, which is PR is gonna slap me. But my personal view is to really use the government purchasing power, and not just necessarily for procurement of actual goods, but for dealing with the government footprint. Like, that's a lot of credits you need to go buy, and that could be quite the injection. So I think that's an interesting tool.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to keep going on to the right from on my screen, which is Mike next.
Yeah, so I think, again, the policies aren't out there fully, but I think one of the things we have to keep driving on is involve the externality in the economy. I think that's really the critical thing that government does in carbon, is make sure that the full cost of carbon is included in our economy, and continue to strengthen that at the end of the day. Price on carbon is great, and I think it's a start, and it's something that we need to have. We also need to have carbon regulation, and we need to really give teeth to some of the reductions and things that we're trying to do. Just as an example, Canada's talking $170 per ton of carbon. That's fantastic. I was listening to Ed Whittingham and in the Energy versus Climate podcast, they were saying, typical steel plant is $300 per ton of CO2 to decarbonize. So, fundamentally, they'll pay that 170 all day long. So any price on carbon has to be coupled with regulations that have teeth. They're going to force the kind of investment that, we need in order to truly decarbonize. And I think that when it gets too expensive, that's where you start to clip into CDR and saying, hey, look, we've got a solution that is cost competitive for those types of decarbonization strategies.
Great. Alex?
Yeah, so I don't have a board of directors, so I can just give you my own opinion. But so I would say that for voters, what they should look for in the party platforms is nuance in what they're saying about carbon dioxide removal. Are they using the right language, as Rob mentioned? I've seen in some of the platforms, like the NDP, for example, they have plans that are very slogan oriented, like for example, they promise to remove fossil fuel subsidies, but they haven't really thought about what the knock-on implications of that are, for example, with removing fossil fuel subsidies without a plan. So I don't know if anyone has been following the electricity crisis in Lebanon that's taken place over the last 2 years. Last 2 weeks, where they have canceled their fossil fuel subsidies and their electrical grid is sort of descending into despair. So make sure that there is a plan in place and that the knock-on effects have been taken into account. As Rob mentioned, they're all talking about CCUS, which is positive, but I would say that if you want to choose between them, really look for the nuance in their plan and how it fits into the overall economy.
Absolutely. So I'm going to take an audience question here. I've got one from David Molinsky. What's the best way to make connections with potential investors for a new CCUS technology? And I'm going to tailor this and say a new CCUS technology in Canada. And let's go back to Alexandra.
I would say you're on track at events like this. There are a number of investors that have already been typing in the chat. And if they've identified yourself, I highly recommend sending them a private message right now.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to take one from Liam. Do you have a sense of how open Canadian policymakers are or will be to ensuring that A, CDR is worked into compliance mechanisms for the price on carbon and clean fuel standard? And I'll stop there and then I'll ask the second part afterwards. So let's point that to Rob.
Honestly, I don't think that they're aware of what CDR is. On some of these issues, like we all live and breathe this. Like, I mean, us as in all the audience, and it's a new area. So I think there's a need for education. So I don't think it's a malicious issue or by any means or a conscious decision. It's just I just don't think that they have the information and awareness of the distinction between CDR and CCUS. Like, we're still using the words carbon capture in Canada, just to give you a sense, and it's primarily thought of as the only thing that exists as geological storage. And so I think there's a need for that, but I think there's definitely openness.
Thank you. So this one's for Mike and it's from Kirsch. What government bodies are you engaging with for permitting your electrochemical sites? And how are you thinking about monitoring and verification of ocean carbon removal?
Yeah, you're striking right at the center of what we work on. So it's a great question. I'll try to be brief because there's a hugely long answer. In Canada, so the two parts are, obviously there's like any country, there's a patchwork of permitting that's required for any kind of a chemical plant, any kind of dispersion into the ocean, any kind of outfalls. I can talk your ear off about, the difference between shore-based addition and international addition and all these wonderful things. But in Canada, it's fundamentally ECCC, or Environment Canada and Climate Change Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, that dictates kind of the stuff you can put in the ocean. The permitting environment is actually pretty open. We spoke to ECCC recently and they said, look, you just do it. And if somebody complains, then you have to put a bunch of fish in a bucket and you put your stuff in the bucket with it. And if half the fish die, then you're in trouble. And that's pretty much how it works. And I said, well, that seems incorrect. And they're like, well, don't tell anybody I told you that, but that's pretty much how it works. And, if it really is enforcement after the fact, you are responsible for ensuring that what you're doing is not what is called deleterious. And if you are responsible about that, then you're probably going to be okay. So that was pretty interesting. There's different requirements around things like wastewater plant mining and pulp and paper in particular, but for anything else, it falls into that bucket. In terms of verification, OAE is really hard for verification because we balance on this knife edge of, sort of like people being afraid of us, doing sort of these crazy interventions in ocean, but actually having the problem that this stuff dilutes so fast that you're not even able to detect it anymore after a certain point. And so we're working with Dalhousie. We've got a 3-year research project that we're lining up with them around answering that question. How exactly do we verify carbon captured into the ocean? And it's not a small problem. We're working with international groups on this, people like Ocean Visions, CEA Consulting, and those kinds of folks to try to bring together what that protocol ends up looking like at the end of the day right now. So it's a big question. It's one we have to resolve over the next several years. And fortunately, we have great supporters like Shopify who are willing to take the risk on us never figuring that out. So that's awesome.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to actually go back to another question that I think a few audience members, and I think Rob, you mentioned this too about NGOs in Canada, but I think I'd actually like to ask this question to Stacey. How do we get more organizations like Carbon 180 here in Canada?
That's a tough question. But I think, I had a couple calls actually yesterday about that topic with some folks who have also identified this gap in the landscape in Canada. And I mean, we finished our call and then came to the conclusion that it's something that would really push things forward, because as we talked about earlier on this session, it really is about the education and just making sure that the government understands what they're doing with their policy and what the adverse effects are. And, we can learn a lot from what's happened in the US with the low carbon fuel standard and like what has been included in terms of what's an acceptable technology or solution. And then we have this rapidly evolving carbon removal space where new technologies are being developed and spun up faster than the policymakers can revise the legislation to include them. And so what we need to do is start to really participate in that. And I'm not meaning we as in Shopify, but the community really needs to have a voice advocating and helping with that education component. I think we are set up in Canada with a lot of experts who can participate in that. There's a lot of really smart folks who can spend some time on that. And I think there's an appetite for funding it as well. So hopefully we'll get there in the near future.
Maybe
Agreed.
Omar can start the Canadian Canada 180.
Just shoot me a message and I'll plug you in to the other people talking about it.
Yeah, perfect. I'll let you know how it goes.
I want to just mention there's a really good podcast on my climate journey with Matt Rogers that talks about how Carbon 180 was created from the model that they use. So like it kind of starts with having that nucleus of like having that entrepreneurial, I don't think you can go out and really hire for this position, like to have that sort of entrepreneurial spirit, those leaders that want to create it. So you need those individuals, and then you tend to need money. But like a very sort of open, sort of patron type of support that allows them to really pursue their entrepreneurial direction. And I think it's played out exceptionally well for Carbon 180, but I think there's a real appetite on sort of both sides here in Canada, but this isn't like an association where like you hire an executive director and it's got to be someone who really wants to build it like an entrepreneurial enterprise.
If you were trying to tee me up there, Rob, that's perfect. So if anyone wants to give me money to build it, I'll be happy to accept. So
put some money in.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're almost to the point where we're going to do some breakout rooms. But before we leave this section, I'm going to just let people know how they can find each of you. So there's your individual company sites, and I know some of you are on social media and some shy away from it. So for those interested in talking to me further about this and hopefully getting that Carbon 180 in Canada off the ground, I'm on LinkedIn, and I also will be working with another group through carbonremoval.ca. So for the rest of you, the panelists here, what's one piece of advice that you wish you got before jumping into your respective businesses? And then maybe as we sign off, tell us where they can find you. And I'll start with Alexandra.
Right. So for people looking to get into the carbon space, I would say that the sector is at a place where the number of options for entrepreneurship are really wider than just new technology development. So there's a lot of work that can be done in things like life cycle analysis, risk assessment for existing infrastructure as we face the climate transition is a big one. And as well, the processes for certification, I think Stacey mentioned, are always changing as new technologies and new understandings of the field come out. So there's a number of different ways to get involved. So just because you're not spinning out of a university lab, there's no reason why you can't be an entrepreneur in this space.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have given myself any different advice. I think probably the advice I got was all pretty solid, and I probably should just listen to it better. So, you know, I think that's probably the space that I'm coming from. You know, a lot of this, you know, Greg will sort of, he's given me this advice for a long time, which is slow down. You know, the big heavy infrastructure and stuff like that, you to an extent, it takes time, and if you rush to be too big too fast, it does end up biting you. You know, sort of, you know, go through the steps properly. Now, I mean, you know, is any entrepreneur really going to take that advice, you know, properly to heart? Probably not, but you know, sort of that's probably smart, is you know, build it in the right steps and scale up appropriately.
Thank you. And Stacey?
So I didn't start my own business. I'm not yet an entrepreneur. There's still time. But the best piece of advice that I received is probably applicable to many other spaces is, you know, you don't have to do what everybody else is doing. And if everyone's running in one direction, it's probably a really good idea to look in the opposite direction and get down to some first principles and think through what your role can be and what kind of impact you can have. So that's been Shopify's approach, and that's the advice that I received when I joined the company, and it's been critical to how we built our fund.
Thank you. So finally, Rob.
I'm taking a bit from the other speakers. I think to create a durable and high performance organization, you really need to focus on building those sort of cultural and trusting links within your team, and also your partners. Like, just, you know, really try to be as transparent as possible and look for that alignment. So culture and trust are really critical to having that, and you know, like durable long-term impact that we need these organizations to be able to have, and like they're built with strong foundations.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to say my final thank yous to first the AirMiners community. You guys have been amazing, and I really encourage everyone else to who hasn't joined AirMiners yet to be on their Slack channel and join their events. I did boot up, and thank you to our panelists. I'm really honored to have gotten the chance to talk to each of you, and I hope I get to work with you soon. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jason. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Omar, and thank you to each of our panelists. Thank you also to Carbon Cure for sponsoring our event today. I've shared a few links in the chat. One is for our post-event survey. So if we'd love to hear feedback of in any way, shape, or form of any kind. So please use that link to let us know what you thought about our event today. Our next event is with Australian climate counselor, environmentalist, professor, and TED speaker, Tim Flannery, next Wednesday, September 1st at 5 p.m. Pacific. So please register for that event. It should be a really interesting conversation, one-on-one, that Catherine Gomes from the University of Pennsylvania is going to have with Tim. Also, today's event is going to be recorded. So if you'd like to review and re-review what you've seen, direct you to our AirMiners YouTube channel, where we should have the event recording up shortly. And finally, please look at our AirMiners community. Come to our AirMiners Slack. Feel free to join. The application link is at the bottom. As a final note, I want to echo some of the comments that Rob, Stacey, Mike, Alexandra, and Omar said at the end. I mean, that yes, entrepreneurship is critical. There are a host of other ways to get involved. You alluded to the need in Canada for a potential advocacy organization for carbon removal. Other opportunities exist in philanthropy or consulting or other ways of having the sinews of an ecosystem kind of bind things together. There's also a need to start up that, even if you're not terribly interested in being a tech entrepreneur, there are ways of developing companies that can be the glue that helps stick things together. So also note that. With that, I want to again thank everyone, and we're going to break off into networking sessions shortly. So I just want to say thank you once more, and hope to see you at our next event at AirMiners soon.